The Bush family's legacy in the oil industry began in the heart of Texas, where George H.W. Bush saw an opportunity to build something greater than himself. Born in the midst of a rapidly changing America, George H.W. Bush entered the world of business with a determination to succeed. With the discovery of oil in the early 1950s, Texas became a treasure trove of resources, and George quickly understood the wealth that could be tapped into. From the dusty oil fields to the luxurious boardrooms, the Bush family's rise was swift. As oil became the lifeblood of the state, the Bush name began to be synonymous with power, prosperity, and influence. Their vision was not just to thrive in the oil business, but to shape the future of American politics and business. With each decision, George H.W. Bush began to carve a path that would one day lead to the White House. But first, he needed to dominate the oil fields of Texas. As the 1950s came to an end, George H.W. Bush expanded his influence beyond the oil fields of Texas. The Bush family's oil empire began to grow, and their vision stretched further than just wealth. It was about positioning themselves as a vital force in shaping the future of the country. Their journey into business was matched only by their rising political ties. George soon became an influential figure, connecting with powerful people across various industries, forging partnerships that would one day prove invaluable. His charm and strategic mind made him an asset in political circles. His relationships grew, and so did the family's ability to effect change, not just in Texas, but on a national scale. The groundwork was laid for their future ascent to the highest levels of power, as they sought to intertwine politics with business in a way few had dared before. By the early 1960s, George H.W. Bush's ambition had grown. No longer content to just be an oil magnate, he sought to cement his place in history. He launched a political career, running for Congress in 1966, His platform was built on his deep understanding of the oil industry and the potential for the United States to tap into the country's vast resources. He won the election, and with it, the Bush family's path toward higher office was paved. His political career, however, was just the beginning. He soon found himself mingling with the country's most powerful figures, learning the intricate dance of power, compromise, and influence. George H.W. Bush was no longer just an oil man. He was becoming a fixture in American politics. Despite the challenges of his early political career, George H.W. Bush persisted, driven by a belief that his experience in business gave him the tools to lead. In 1966, after securing a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, he quickly made his mark. His understanding of the oil industry, combined with his political savvy, made him an influential voice in Washington. Soon after, he was appointed to important committees and began to gain a reputation as a rising star in the Republican Party. The Bush family's political influence was growing, but so were their business interests. George H.W. Bush's ability to navigate both worlds, business and politics, made him uniquely positioned to influence the trajectory of both. As the 1970s unfolded, the Bush family's reach expanded further. George H.W. Bush's increasing prominence in political circles allowed him to forge even stronger alliances, ensuring the family's place among America's elite. Oil prices soared, and the Bush family's wealth multiplied, with their interests in the energy sector proving more lucrative than ever. But the rise of the Bush family was not just a story of wealth, it was a story of influence. As the family expanded its business and political reach, they soon became a formidable force. But with power comes scrutiny. As the Bush name grew in stature, the family also had to navigate the dangerous waters of public life, where every decision could have a lasting impact. By the mid-1970s, George H.W. Bush had solidified his place in the political landscape, becoming the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. His position offered him the opportunity to blend his sharp business acumen with his political insight. The Bush family's rise to national prominence was intertwined with the global stage, where George H.W. Bush began to shape U.S. foreign policy while also making strategic business decisions. He navigated complex diplomatic environments and leveraged his relationships in the oil industry to secure advantageous positions for both his political career and the family business. His deep understanding of the energy sector and its political ramifications helped him form critical alliances, securing a seat at the table with the world's most powerful leaders. The Bush family was no longer just an oil dynasty. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with in global politics. As ambassador to the UN, George H.W. Bush built his reputation as a diplomat. But his true mastery lay in balancing the world of politics with the world of business. He continued to expand his family's financial empire, ensuring that his connections in the political sphere translated into profitable business ventures. While advocating for U.S. interests abroad, he skillfully negotiated deals that benefited the Bush family's oil holdings. The connection between business and politics was never clearer. His deep ties with key political players allowed him to advance his family's corporate agenda, positioning them not only as a political family, but as a key player in the world's economic landscape. The Bush family's power was becoming all-encompassing, influencing both Washington's corridors of power and the global financial markets. In 1980, the political tides shifted as George H.W. Bush ran for the Republican nomination for president. His campaign was propelled not just by his own political experience, but by the support of his powerful family, whose wealth and influence spanned the business and political realms. The Bush family's backing of the campaign was massive, and they used their resources and connections to gain the upper hand in the Republican primaries. Although he didn't win the nomination, his bid for president helped cement his place as a formidable political figure. More importantly, it set the stage for his future run and gave him a platform to expand the Bush family's influence even further. As a political dynasty, they were starting to shape the future of the Republican Party and of American politics. Despite his loss in the 1980 Republican primaries, George H.W. Bush's political trajectory was far from over. In 1981, President Ronald Reagan appointed him vice president, a pivotal moment in both the Bush family's political and business influence. George H.W. Bush's time as vice president proved to be a period of immense political capital. He was often the bridge between Reagan's administration and the powerful business elites who had supported Reagan's rise to power. The vice presidency allowed him to strengthen his family's political ties even further, while also facilitating key business dealings that cemented the Bush name in both American politics and the global economy. This role would ultimately serve as the springboard for his own presidential run in 1988, a step that would culminate in the family's political dynasty reaching its zenith. With Reagan's second term winding down in the mid-1980s, George H.W. Bush began to prepare for his own presidential campaign. The Bush family's influence had reached unprecedented levels, with business ventures across the globe and an intricate web of political connections. His time as vice president had not only solidified his role as a national figure, but had also made him a key figure in the world of finance and international diplomacy. As his campaign for president gathered steam, the Bush family used their wealth and political capital to secure critical endorsements, ensuring that George H.W. Bush was positioned for victory. In 1988, he won the Republican nomination and eventually the presidency, bringing the Bush family's power to the very top of American politics. By the early 1990s, the Bush family had firmly established itself not only as political elites, but also as key players in the global business arena. George H.W. Bush's presidency, though marked by both triumphs and challenges, laid the foundation for a legacy that would transcend his own tenure in office. His son George W. Bush was quickly rising to prominence within the family business and beyond. His political career began to take shape in the late 1980s, culminating in his successful run for governor of Texas in 1994. George W. Bush's governance marked a new chapter for the Bush family as they navigated the shifting political landscape. The father and son duo, each in their own right, had become symbols of American ambition. And as the world watched, it became clear that the Bush family would continue to wield immense influence for decades to come. George W. Bush's rise to political power was neither swift nor easy. His early years as a businessman in the energy sector had familiarized him with the cutthroat world of corporate America, but it was in Texas politics that he would truly make his mark. As governor, he brought a bold conservative vision to the state, steering Texas into a period of economic growth. His leadership style, a mix of charm and conviction, resonated with voters. The 2000 election, however, would be the real test of his political mettle. The tight race against Al Gore, filled with legal challenges and recounts, tested both his resolve and his family's political machine. Ultimately, George W. Bush emerged victorious, marking the beginning of a new chapter for the Bush family, this time at the highest office in the land. The 2000 presidential election was one of the closest in American history, fraught with controversy, recounts, and legal battles. In Florida, a state that would ultimately decide the outcome, the Bush family's influence was palpable. George W. Bush's political machine went to work, leveraging his network of allies in business, politics, and media to secure the contested state. In the final moments, the U.S. Supreme Court intervened, halting the recount and effectively giving Bush the presidency. This moment, one of dramatic political maneuvering, marked the culmination of the Bush family's decades-long quest for political power. The victory was hard-earned, but it was also a testament to the Bush family's resilience and their unyielding grip on the levers of power. Once George W. Bush assumed office in 2021, the world was watching closely, especially after the contentious nature of the election. His administration faced immediate challenges, chief among them the September 11 attacks, which would forever alter the course of American history. The Bush family, already deeply entrenched in global politics and business, was now at the center of national and international crises. George W. Bush's response to the 9/11 attacks, leading the country into the War on Terror, would define his presidency. The Bush family's legacy was no longer just about oil or business. It was about their leadership in times of global crisis. As the war escalated, the Bush family became central figures in a new chapter of American foreign policy. In the years that followed, George W. Bush's administration faced criticism for the war in Iraq, which had begun in 2003. While some viewed the war as a necessary action in the fight against terrorism, others questioned the rationale behind the invasion. Despite the growing opposition, the Bush family remained steadfast in their position, believing that their actions were justified in the broader context of national security. The decision to go to war not only defined George W. Bush's presidency, but also left a lasting mark on the Bush family's legacy. As the years wore on, the costs, both human and political, became clearer, but the Bush family's place in American history was already cemented. From oil fields to the Oval Office, the Bush family had navigated a complex web of business, politics, and power. In the aftermath of the September 11 attacks and the subsequent war in Iraq, the Bush family's once unshakable political standing began to face serious scrutiny. The Iraq War, which was initially framed as a necessary move in the fight against terrorism, became increasingly controversial. As the death tolls climbed, and the war dragged on with no clear end in sight, public opinion shifted. Protests erupted across the country, questioning not only the rationale for the invasion, but also the Bush administration's handling of the aftermath. At the same time, revelations of questionable intelligence leading up to the invasion of Iraq further fueled suspicion. The Bush family's reputation, once tied to strength and resolve, began to be seen in a more critical light, with accusations of political manipulation and self-interest gaining momentum. The Bush family was no stranger to controversy, but by the mid-2000s, their legacy was being tested on a global scale. While George W. Bush faced mounting political pressure, the family's business empire also found itself under increased scrutiny. Critics began to question the deep ties between the Bush family's business interests, particularly in the oil industry, and the administration's foreign policies. The perception of cronyism grew, with accusations that personal gain from the oil industry had influenced decisions regarding the Iraq War. At the same time, the ongoing war in Afghanistan added another layer of complexity to the Bush family's legacy. The situation seemed to spiral as the ongoing conflicts became more entangled with the family's political future, leaving many to wonder if their business dealings were compromising national interests. Amid growing criticism, the Bush administration faced an internal crisis as well. The public's trust in the government's handling of the war began to erode, and with it, the once united front of the Bush family started to show signs of strain. With midterm elections approaching, Republican candidates began to distance themselves from the president, fearing the backlash that could cost them their seats. The Bush family's political machine, once seen as a well-oiled powerhouse, began to sputter under the weight of mounting opposition. Inside the White House, George W. Bush and his advisors struggled to formulate a strategy that could stem the growing disillusionment. Meanwhile, the specter of the economic fallout from the war also began to loom large, threatening to overshadow the family's political achievements and their hold on power. By 2007, public opinion had soured dramatically, and the Bush family's grip on power was slipping. The war in Iraq, once heralded as a victory for the U.S., had turned into an interminable quagmire. Military casualties were on the rise, while the costs of reconstruction mounted. As political opponents gained momentum, the Bush family found themselves at the center of a growing wave of discontent. Questions arose about the integrity of the administration's decision-making process. Were the Bush family's personal interests in oil and defense contracts influencing the war? The accusations of corruption grew louder, and the family's political reputation seemed irrevocably damaged. Despite this, George W. Bush remained resolute, vowing to stay the course. But as the war dragged on, the political and personal costs began to weigh heavily on the family, and their once untouchable status seemed to be slipping away. As the 2008 financial crisis began to unfold, the Bush family faced yet another test of their political and business acumen. The collapse of major financial institutions, the plummeting stock market, and rising unemployment all seemed to point to a systemic failure within the economic policies endorsed by the Bush administration. Critics argued that the Bush family, with its deep ties to the financial industry, had failed to regulate the system properly. The crisis exposed the limits of the Bush family's influence and left them grappling with the fallout. The Bush name, once synonymous with success and power, now became associated with economic instability and failure. With the impending end of George W. Bush's second term, the family found themselves reflecting on the cost of their legacy as the nation faced the daunting challenge of economic recovery. After the turbulent final years of George W. Bush's presidency, the Bush family found themselves at a crossroads. With the election of Barack Obama in 2008, the political landscape shifted dramatically. The Democratic Party surged to power, and the Bush family's influence was at an all-time low. Yet, even as the family faced mounting criticism and waning public favor, their ties to the political and business elite remained. In the years following George W. Bush's departure from office, the Bush family began to quietly rebuild their influence. George H. W. Bush and his son worked together to position the family as respected elder statesmen in the world of global diplomacy. Their work on various humanitarian and political initiatives helped to restore some of the goodwill they had lost during the later years of the presidency. But the path to recovery was not without its challenges. With the world watching, the Bush family needed to re-establish themselves both politically and personally. The Bush family's efforts to regain their political stature were aided by their long-standing connections in business, media, and politics. The family began to play an increasingly important role in public life, lending their names to causes that transcended politics. George H. W. Bush and George W. Bush both championed philanthropic endeavors and worked with other political figures to address global issues like healthcare, education, and human rights. Through the George W. Bush Presidential Center, the family sought to redefine their legacy by focusing on initiatives that would make a positive impact on the world. Slowly but surely, the Bush family returned to a position of respect, though their influence was now tempered by the lessons learned from their earlier years in power. As the years went by, George W. Bush began to distance himself from the political battles of his presidency. He focused on his post-presidential initiatives, including his work with veterans and his commitment to spreading democracy worldwide. His public appearances were often centered on his philanthropic efforts rather than politics, a deliberate effort to reshape his image. Meanwhile, the Bush family continued to maintain a presence in American political life through their connections, but they now played a more behind-the-scenes role. George W. Bush's memoir, Decision Points, released in 2010, offered insight into his presidency and his legacy. While it received mixed reviews, it also opened a conversation about his time in office and the lessons he learned. The Bush family's political return was less about reclaiming power and more about solidifying a legacy of service and growth. While George W. Bush's political influence had waned, his family's presence in business remained strong. The Bush family's oil interests and connections to the financial industry continued to thrive, albeit with less public fanfare. The family's name still carried weight, especially in the world of finance, where they leveraged their decades of experience to navigate the rapidly changing global economy. As the years passed, the Bush family became increasingly involved in corporate boards, advisory roles, and private business ventures. They maintained their ties to energy and defense sectors, using their vast network to secure lucrative deals. Despite the controversies of the past, the family's business acumen allowed them to remain relevant in an ever-evolving global market. As the Bush family entered the 2020s, their influence in both political and business realms had diminished in comparison to their heyday. However, their legacy continued to shape American politics, particularly within the Republican Party. George W. Bush's more moderate political stance in his later years allowed him to remain a respected figure among certain segments of the American public, even as the political landscape had shifted dramatically. Meanwhile, Jeb Bush, George W. Bush's brother, made a run for the presidency in 2016, although he was unable to secure the nomination. Still, the Bush name remained a symbol of a particular era in American politics. The family's legacy of power, philanthropy, and service continued to influence American society, and though they no longer held the highest office, their presence was still felt. As the family moved forward, they continued to focus on rebuilding their reputation and contributing to the public good. As the Bush family emerged from the shadows of political controversy, they found new strength in the world of finance. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, the family's connections to major financial institutions became more apparent. The Bush name, once synonymous with politics and oil, had become a symbol of corporate power. George W. Bush's post-presidential years were marked by his involvement in various business ventures, including speaking engagements and advisory roles for financial institutions. The family, though not in the spotlight as they once were, was deeply embedded in the corporate world. From hedge funds to private equity, the Bush family leveraged their vast network and experience to maintain their relevance in the global financial markets. They remained key players in industries ranging from energy to banking, continuing to wield influence over the economic forces that shaped the U.S. and the world. The Bush family's involvement in Wall Street wasn't just limited to the financial markets, but extended to significant investments in the global energy sector. Their ties to oil and gas remained a cornerstone of their wealth, and these industries became an integral part of their post-political power. The family's connections to major energy companies and financial institutions allowed them to continue growing their financial footprint. George H. W. Bush and his son, George W. Bush, used their collective experience to help energy companies navigate volatile markets. They became influential advisors in global energy policy, shaping decisions that affected oil prices, energy security, and international trade. Their influence wasn't confined to the U.S. The Bush family's financial and energy dealings had far-reaching effects, making them one of the most significant families in the global business landscape. As the 2010s unfolded, the Bush family's financial influence grew alongside the global economic recovery. Their ability to navigate the complexities of Wall Street and the energy sector allowed them to make strategic moves in areas like renewable energy, defense contracting, and technology. At the same time, the family's philanthropic efforts, particularly those focused on education, healthcare, and global human rights, helped to reframe their legacy. The Bush family increasingly became a bridge between the world of high finance and the global philanthropic landscape, using their influence to direct significant capital toward causes that aligned with their vision of social responsibility. Their presence in the financial world grew, not only as powerful investors but as key players in shaping policy and economic development across the globe. As they navigated this new phase, the Bush family remained a force in both business and humanitarian causes. In 2014, the Bush family faced a turning point as the global economy entered a new era, with new challenges arising in both business and politics. While their ties to Wall Street remained strong, they were also forced to adapt to new economic realities. The family's deep connections to the oil industry were challenged by the growing shift toward renewable energy sources, and they had to diversify their interests. The Bush family, led by George W. Bush, looked to technology and global finance to maintain their prominence. They became involved in tech startups, alternative energy ventures, and even digital currencies, recognizing the potential to shape the future economy. Their financial dealings and investments were increasingly aligned with innovation, pushing the Bush family further into the modern age of business, while retaining the political influence they had built over the years. By the late 2010s and into the 2020s, the Bush family had successfully repositioned themselves as leaders in both business and global finance, with an enduring impact on the global economy. Though they no longer held political office, their influence in Wall Street, energy markets, and corporate boards remained undeniable. The family had also managed to diversify their business interests, positioning themselves as strategic investors in emerging markets, particularly in Asia and Africa. Through careful management of their wealth and business ventures, the Bush family continued to play a significant role in shaping the future of international business. As the world faced new challenges, economic, environmental, and political, the Bush family was poised to remain influential, guiding businesses, governments, and institutions through the complexities of the modern world. Their legacy, though shifting, remained intact, a blend of political heritage and business prowess. As the Bush family entered the 2020s, their legacy, built on decades of political influence, wealth, and power, was increasingly called into question. The world had changed dramatically, and the Bush family, once seen as symbols of strength and leadership, found themselves reflecting on their place in modern history. With their political ties fading and public perception shifting, they were forced to confront the controversies that had marked their rise. The wars, the financial crises, and the ongoing questions about their involvement in the oil industry became central to how future generations would view their legacy. The family found themselves at a crossroads. How would they be remembered? Could they reclaim the respect they had lost, or was their legacy forever tainted by the choices they had made? The final reckoning had arrived, and the Bush family now faced the consequences of their actions, both in the public eye and behind closed doors. The questions surrounding the Bush family's legacy only deepened with time. As younger generations took charge of the country and the world moved further into the 21st century, the Bush family's historical influence became more distant. The public questioned their involvement in global conflicts, the handling of the economy, and the personal wealth accumulated through business dealings. The younger Bushes, including Jeb Bush, who had made his own bid for the presidency, also struggled to escape the shadow of their family's past. The media's scrutiny intensified, and the family's every move was dissected by a public that had become increasingly critical. Yet, despite the growing calls for accountability, the Bush family held a quiet confidence in their legacy. They believed that time, reflection, and their philanthropic work would eventually restore their place in history. But the path forward remained uncertain. In the midst of the public fallout, the Bush family turned to their philanthropic efforts to restore their reputation. The George W. Bush Presidential Center became a central part of their efforts to highlight their post-presidential contributions. George W. Bush, in particular, focused on his work with veterans and the initiatives aimed at combating global diseases like HIV/AIDS. His personal art collection and his public advocacy for mental health also became key components of his legacy, helping to shift the narrative away from the wars and controversies that had once defined his presidency. Yet, even as they made strides in reshaping their image, the legacy of the Bush family's involvement in the Middle East and their financial dealings with oil and defense companies remained a stain on their reputation. The final reckoning was not just a matter of public relations, but also a reckoning with their own past. Despite the Bush family's efforts to redefine their legacy, the ghosts of their past continued to haunt them. The Iraq War, the financial crises, and the accusations of cronyism and corruption could not be erased, and the family was constantly reminded of the choices they had made. The public was unforgiving, and every new scandal or revelation seemed to confirm the worst suspicions about their true motivations. As the years went on, the Bush family found themselves fighting not just to maintain their relevance, but to protect the family name. They were forced to confront the cost of their ambition, realizing that their legacy could never be entirely free from controversy. It was a sobering realization, one that made them question whether their desire for power had been worth the personal and public cost.